for Google, this is a return to its glory days, potentially. An engineering-driven, research-driven company has become relevant again in a really massive way. This is Google getting back to what they used to be really, really good at before it became more of a sort of product world. Raw product is not Google's strength, but product based on the best tech absolutely is.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
And today we have an absolutely jam-packed, AI-focused, politics-free episode for you. We are going to review Google's I.O., it's their annual developer conference. They announced so much stuff, nearly all of it in AI, unsurprisingly. And Chris, it was an absolute tour de force. I see them flexing their muscles. So we're going to go through all the announcements, talk about why they're important and why they play to Google's strengths. Then we're going to talk about a few other announcements from Microsoft, also in the space of AI, Nvidia, Windsurf, OpenAI, and finally, we're going to talk about Airbnb wanting to become the everything store for services, just like Amazon, but for someone mowing your lawn. All that and more right after the break. Stay tuned. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Okay, let's jump right into it. For the first topic, we wanted to talk about everything that Google announced at their I.O. developer conference. It's always an amazing showcase of everything that Google's been building more on the technology and product side. And of course, this year it was all about AI. And Chris, it really is a tour de force that shows off everything that Google is capable of and its massive natural advantages. And I think they're really starting to get to speed. So I thought, let's dive into all the different themes and all the different things that were announced and dissect them. The first thing that we saw is new core AI products. One is called Gemini Live, which is really, I guess, the branding of what they previously had announced as a research project called Project Astra, which is this real-time, fully multimodal model that means it can ingest live video, photos, audio, text, and can also reply in that way. And so this is now embedded into a bunch of different touch points across Google, which allows you to sort of, for example, take out your phone, just turn on your camera, show a video of what you're working on, and ask Gemini for help. And so notably, this is now live, apparently in production. This is not just another research preview. This is now in product. And, you know, I think a really great example of Google showing off their really strong, fundamental AI chops. What do we think of this one, Chris?
It's a lot like OpenAI's smart voice or advanced voice. When you go into advanced voice, you can turn on the camera and it can look at the world and react to the world and this kind of thing. Notably, this is the demo that when it first came out, they didn't quite explain that it was a bit sped up and it was a bit, optimized in the video. And people thought that it was, real and amazing. And this is now becoming more real, more amazing, and actually in production. And it's very, very exciting. Interestingly, they've also plugged it into Google's AI mode. If you guys remember, a number of weeks ago, I mentioned this AI mode experiment that I was getting access to when I was using Google Search. So they're now adding AI straight into Google Search, not just smart replies or AI replies, but a whole chat mode. And also chat has what they're calling Search Live, which is essentially the same thing. It's this ability to turn on the camera and talk to search. It's real-time, conversational, multimodal, generative AI. And it's baked into the Gemini app and to core search. Using their natural advantages of distribution. They invented the transformer. They have massive compute, global compute, massive data sets, and they're now deploying at pace. It's pretty incredible to watch.
Now, speaking of AI mode and search, you mentioned we've covered it before as an experiment, but it was announced at I.O. that this is now on by default for all US users. So, and presumably it won't be much longer before the rest of the world follows. So I think it was just last week, Chris, we were talking about the fact that Google's search market share is maybe dropping a little bit, that Apple mentioned in the deposition that Google search volume is going down a little bit. Well, Google are doing the right thing from the Innovator's Dilemma playbook, which is trying to disrupt themselves here, right? So I'm personally surprised and impressed that Google are moving as quickly as they are and potentially disrupting their core search business. As we were just saying, their tech is really good, and now they're leveraging their absolutely incomparable distribution advantage in search. So that if you get that full AI mode in Google and the underlying models are as good as OpenAI or as good as Perplexity, why would you go anywhere else? And we'll wait and see, but it's really a tour de force, like I said, where Google are stitching together everything that they have going for them. And this is exactly the right move.
Yeah, and it was notable that they emphasized two things that I think are very, very important. In the last episode, we talked about this question of, can Google monetize an AI, a generative AI search result the same way they monetize the 10 blue links or whatever, the standard search? And they emphasized, oh, look, over here on the right, there are links to products and related businesses as per your search prompt. And they also mentioned, which by itself is very interesting, that they're pointing to the commercial monetization model there. And the other thing they highlighted, actually, I would say they kind of glossed over it, but for me, it was a highlight, is the idea that the search result, the generative search result, kind of creates a custom UX tailored to the prompt, tailored to the search. And this is what I've been saying, ad infinitum for months and months and months, is the generative AI will generate a UX based on the use case, based on your prompt, based on what you need it to do. And so this is subtly pointing to that the search result can be dramatically different. The information architecture, the kind of the mini application, if you will adapt to the question you're asking and the search result that you need. That's just a taste of what's to come for all frontier models everywhere.
So that's the new core AI products, Chris, where Google is really leveraging search and its AI capabilities to sort of have this sort of pure AI products. But there's so much more. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is personal context, right? Again, something we've talked about for a long time that Google has frustratingly in the past never really leveraged as well as it could, is it knows so much about you. It knows your search history. For Gmail users, which let's face it, is most of us, it knows your entire email history. It has lots of documents in your Google Drive. It has your photos. It knows so much about you. And now they have indicated with what they're calling personal context that they're going to start creating a personal context based on everything it knows about you so that the AI is personalized to you. It knows who you are. It understands your background. It has access to so much information that is relevant to you. And that's obviously an incredible power play. And again, Google leveraging its advantages. And, I think one of the places they announced that is really obviously a core use of this is in Gmail, extending their smart replies. So again, this is not a very original idea, right? The idea that AI could perhaps reply to a bunch of your emails for you, or at least help with that. And there are a lot of products that do that or attempt to do that. I use Superhuman, for example. It has that capability. But again, Google has this incredible advantage of so much data and that core AI functionality and capability as well. And so I'm really excited to see what Gmail's smart replies can do. Once it knows so much about me, Google pointed out it can match your tone of voice, your vocabulary, but it can also reach into your Gmail and your Drive and pull out relevant details directly into the reply. So if people ask you about your flight itinerary, the auto reply will contain the details, which is an amazing thing if it is pulled off correctly.
Yeah, that's one of the concrete examples they gave, right? So let's make this very, very clear. So it has access to your calendar. It has access to your Google Drive. It has access to your Gmail. Yeah, with something like Google personalized smart replies, it can write in your tone of voice. It can retrieve content from your Drive. It can retrieve content from your calendar, and so on. But this is going to be applied to everything. So you can do deep research on your Google Drive, right? It can add events or schedule events on your calendar. It is starting to become that mythical personal assistant that we all dream about, that gets to know you more and more over time and can take actions for you in your most important productivity apps and use cases. You said the magic phrase at the end there, if this is pulled off well. I can tell you right now in my Gmail, when I press the Gemini button and I ask it for something mildly interesting from my email, it basically shits the bed more often than not. When I try to do something interesting in Sheets, it basically shits the bed more often than not. If you're not just using it for like a search of your email, and I don't quite know why it's so profoundly dumb. I may not have the right subscription. I may not have maybe I'm just using the consumer one instead of workplace or something, but the button is there. It's called Gemini and it doesn't do shit. So, I need to go dig around, but either I'm, doing the wrong thing, but that's really a UX problem. And they're not explaining to me, hey, there is a version of this that actually works. Or there isn't a version of this that works yet. And they're just sticking the Gemini logo everywhere and creating a really bad taste in my mouth. So hopefully this gets much better, much more quickly, and we'll see if it actually works in real life.
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning one of the reasons why something like personal context is actually difficult, and again, maybe something that leans into Google's strengths, right? You can say, well, if it can create like a 800 billion parameter model for the whole world, why is it so hard for it to just add a little bit of personal context? And the difference is, if you've got a foundation model, that's one single model. If you are then fine-tuning it or learning a personal context for every single user, where Google has actually billions with a B of users, that is a billion different jobs. So just computationally, infrastructurally, it's really hard. It's the same reason why Gmail is slower than Google search, right? Because it is storing individual emails. It's a vastly bigger data set. And so to be able to do this requires an incredible infrastructure. And again, Google is really good at infrastructure, so I wouldn't count them out, but it's far from trivial. Just because you can have a great frontier model doesn't mean you can have a great personalized model for every person, but it really seems like they have woken up, Chris. And yes, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. But we've also said Google have so many natural advantages. They get multiple bites at the cherry here. They can screw it up and screw it up again. But eventually, if they get it right, they're right there where they need to be. And I think that's what we're starting to see. And, it's funny. All of this reminds me of the great Google Plus push over a decade ago now, right? The last time Google felt they faced an existential threat was during the rise of Facebook. And so they had the sort of all-in company attempt to kind of match Facebook by creating a Google social network, which was known as Google Plus. And of course, that was a big failure. And I worked at Google at the time, and so I saw from the inside the ways in which it failed, which is that they tried to create a standalone social product rather than weaving through the already vast amount of social context and information it had about each person to create an integrated social experience across Google. And what I'm seeing here with AI, Chris, is I think they've learned from that mistake. They're realizing that they have all of these incredible assets and they need to thoughtfully weave them together using this AI infrastructure to really create this very, very powerful moat. And, the exciting thing about this I.O., yes, we still need to try these things out, but it was notable, in contrast to some announcements from Facebook and Apple and so on, very few of these things were, hey, this is a research preview. Nearly all of them were, hey, we've just launched this, right? So this is not vaporware. These things are now coming into Google at pace. And I reckon they've probably got a bunch of it right, some of it wrong. But the stuff they've gotten wrong, they'll just have another go at it and another go at it. And it's very hard to see this momentum slowing.
Yeah, a lot of this was actually them announcing the renaming, rebadging, and production version of a thing they've been talking about for a while. So like Gemini Live is really the product name of Project Astra, for example. We're going to start talking about something that was formerly called Project Mariner. Project Starlight has become Google Beam, which is the video conferencing. So they've been previewing a lot of this stuff. Today seemed like the day that they're putting it into production and they're giving it a proper name and a proper launch. So yeah, it's quite exciting. And actually, speaking about that, let's talk about the next thing that they announced, which we said, you and I, that it was likely that they were going to hesitate to do this, given the DOJ and monopoly investigations that are going into Google. We said they're going to struggle to add Gemini to Chrome, and that they're going to have to be careful about, cross-selling Gemini into the browser There's been a lot of attention on the browser and a lot of attention about how they're using their market dominance in one place to sell to other places. Well, they just did it. They're adding Gemini to Chrome, and they're adding very powerful features to Chrome, including something they call Try It On, where if you're on an e-commerce site and you're looking at an outfit, you can actually use the model to take the outfit, take a photo of you, and then like map the two together, and to see what it's like to wear the outfit you're seeing on the page. And then if it's out of stock or whatever, to set a price watch up and set an inventory up and to trigger these agentic flows so that it can, as soon as it's available, add it to your cart and ask for your permission to pay for it, which is miraculous in one hand, sort of obvious on the other, but also a risk for them because they are having so much scrutiny from these massive antitrust and investigations.
It's really interesting. Like the key word here, once again, Chris, is distribution, right? Like Google has had this incredible distribution. They have the core search engine. They have Chrome and Android, which they built and acquired back in the day as a very smart strategic play to make sure they weren't intermediated to their Google search engine. So now they have all of these incredible distribution channels, and they're just plugging their world-class AI thoughtfully into all of them. And that's why I keep saying, it's this absolute juggernaut. And I can't help but feel that for Google, this is a return to its glory days potentially, where just that core technology, which has always been a strength, it's always been an engineering-driven, research-driven company, has become relevant again in a really massive way, where what differentiates products is the best technical capabilities. And from research, we have deep research, which is owned by Google. We have those foundation models. We have some of the world's best infrastructure. They also announced a new TensorFlow chip, so they're making their own AI chipsets, all the way through to distribution. Google owns the whole thing and is good at that whole thing, right? If they continue to move decisively and are able to shake off some of the, the big company cobwebs, then this is Google getting back to what they used to be really, really good at back when it was all about search and data centers and who had the lowest latency and all of that stuff before it became more of a sort of product world, because raw product is not Google's strength, but product based on the best tech absolutely is.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of products, they're also, making very big moves into the application layer beyond core Google, right? So the other thing they announced was this thing called Flow, powered by VO3 and Imagen 4, which is a video production app. VO3 is absolutely astounding, really amazing videos that include, get this, sound effects, background sounds, and voices.
Lip-synced voices.
I haven't seen a demo that does this from anywhere else. They showed a little, I don't know, what was it, a skunk or a squirrel talking to an owl. They showed an old man on the sea talking with a gruff voice. Holy shit. Like, what? Yeah, this is now, not only did they announce the model, they announced kind of an application layer tool to play with the model and have a creative workflow. As we talked about in the last few episodes, these companies, in order to justify their valuations, justify their growth, to own the categories, they are going to need to own some of these core application flows. And so it's productivity, search, creativity, you name it. And yeah, Flow with VO3, with sound effects and voices and background, oh my God, is going to be very, very powerful as a tool for creatives and for everyday people, everyday marketers, everyday storytellers who are trying to tell a story in a way that would have cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of production to do before.
It's pretty incredible. Like, I can't help but feel that Google has gone full beast mode right now with releasing all this stuff. VO3, a top-of-the-line video generation model. Imagen 4, a top-of-the-line image generation model. In both cases, they're looking to have leapfrogged OpenAI here. Bundling it into a product, Flow, I'm less convinced about Flow for the reason I just mentioned, which is Google is less good at complex products. It's more good at complex technology. It has a tendency to lose interest in things like that, but we'll see. But yeah, we're living in an age of wonders, Chris. It also reminds me another thing that they announced, just kind of in passing, not even a major announcement, which just sort of proves how crazy this whole thing is live translation now baked into Google Meet. And again, live in production, not a research preview. if you were speaking Spanish and I was speaking English, we could just sort of turn this thing on and it would translate my English to Spanish for you. It would translate your Spanish to English for me. Now, this is the concept of the Babelfish in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Which was this sort of unbelievable technological breakthrough that no one could imagine. It just seemed unrealistic. And now it's just nearly a side announcement as part of this absolute showing from Google across everything it can do in AI. So yeah, there's just an incredible amount happening here. And if I sound kind of excited, I think I'm going to go off and buy some Google stock after this because it seems to me like they're firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I've
Not investment advice.
You're always worried about that. I've been bullish on the Magnificent Seven, Magnificent Six. Fuck Tesla. For this whole cycle, I think there's a lot to love here in terms of buying their stock. The last one, which I have not yet had a chance to see this part of the announcement, Yenev, is the Android XR smart glasses by Warby Parker.
Yeah, I had a look. So there's a couple of interesting things. So first of all, Android XR is this sort of operating system for wearables, I guess, specifically. And one of the interesting things that Google announced is, again, with a more open model, they're having a bit of a buck each way where they're saying, you know what, there are multiple form factors for visual wearables. So they had an example of something that looked a lot like the Apple Vision Pro. And they're like, this is something you might use when you're at home at your desk or you're watching a movie or something. It's sort of an immersive experience all the way through to wearable glasses by Warby Parker and Gentle Monster, which is, I'm not cool enough to have heard, but apparently is an eyewear brand and a sunglasses brand that's very popular right now. A lot like the Ray-Bans that you're wearing, Chris, that are the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. So what they're saying is they've built an operating system that is suitable for all of these different wearable form factors, which I think is interesting and probably smart. Let the market figure out what works and what doesn't. But yes, then they've also announced these partnerships with designer eyewear manufacturers to actually create a direct competitor to the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. And again, I think they're pretty well positioned to do so. And they've probably got plenty of resources and time to throw behind this. Will the first generation be as good as the Meta ones? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it'll be better. But if it's worse, then they can just have another go and another go. And again, I feel they have a lot of natural advantages behind them, including Android in this case, right? A very mature operating system that they can customize for this use case.
It's interesting because Mark Zuckerberg laid this playbook out, right? He said, and he was right, and that there's going to be a spectrum of devices from the full immersive, hardcore, use case first device, which is the big fat goggles you wear on your head, all the way down to the form factor first, lightweight device, which gets better and better as the technology shrinks. And you need everything along that spectrum from form factor first to immersion first, from lightweight and everyday with no screen to, two giant 4K screens slapped to your eyeballs. Google has been very quick to adopt that strategy, if you will. I'm not saying they took it from him, but they're adopting the same strategy.
Great artist still.
But there's so many times you see these companies failing to adopt the best ideas from the other. Like, I can't tell you how frustrating Samsung and all these other Android brands are when they have 17 different brands for a phone, where it's just like, can you not see what Apple is doing? It's just called an iPhone, guys. Like, just give it a simple name, right? But here they're borrowing that. But here's the other thing that's really interesting. Mark Zuckerberg has claimed that, Llama and the meta world is going to be the open source, open ecosystem alternative to Apple. And what Google has said is, no. Google and Android are the Android to Apple. And we have a generic operating system that any glasses manufacturer, any wearable manufacturer can use. And so far, Meta's quote unquote Meta OS or Meta AR is only on Meta devices. And I don't just mean the immersive VR devices, I mean also the Ray-Ban smart glasses. And so while they've been building vertically integrated devices more like Apple, while claiming that they're the open source alternative, Google, it sounds like here, is saying, yeah, this is based on Android. Warby Parker and Little Monsters are our first, or Gentle Monsters or whatever. But it's an OS. You can pick it up and use it just the same way Samsung or Xiaomi or whatever uses the Android operating system.
Maybe I've just drunk a little bit too much Google Kool-Aid this morning, but it strikes me they're in the strongest position. And I just think it's worth going back in history here, because if you think about it, it is the strategic decisions to go with Android and Chrome to develop these things, to own these things, that is still paying off for Google. And, this is where long-term strategy is really valuable. And Google have actually been masters of this sort of defensive distribution strategy, right? Because Facebook, even, again, we're going back over 10 years. I don't know, for those of you who are old enough and in the weeds enough to remember something called Facebook Home, which was their attempt to create basically a very heavily skinned version of Android, an operating system that they could own, because Facebook have never owned that full distribution. It hurt them then. They failed, they've continued to fail, and it's hurting them now, right? Google has end-to-end distribution twice over. It has Chrome and it has Android. Facebook does not have that distribution. And then furthermore, because Android has been around for a long time, it is now an ecosystem, second only to Apple's ecosystem, right? I've got an Android phone. I've got an Android watch. I've got, headphones, earbuds that connect to Android. Now, if I can get Android glasses, they'll connect to all these things. What's Facebook got? What's Meta got? It does not have that. And so again, natural advantages. If Google gets the execution right, and if they don't lose interest, you'd sort of have to bet on them to become the standard for this thing.
You mentioned that they have Android and Chrome. In the context of AI, they have a lot more than that in terms of distribution, right? They have search, they have the productivity suite, they have Nest, they have YouTube. These surfaces are some of the biggest gravity wells in the history of the world. the largest attention and intention surfaces that have ever been devised by man, right? And there is very few other companies that have anything that compares. Apple, through their devices, yes. Meta, sorta through Instagram and whatever, and WhatsApp, sorta. Microsoft, maybe at work, maybe through Xbox. Google, holy shit. Work, play, personal, TV, product, you name it, they're there. I think it's the second largest position in my portfolio behind Nvidia. That's where I am on Google. Yeah, just in full transparency, I'm Nvidia first, and that's mostly because of the growth of Nvidia, and I haven't sold any. Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, in that order. The further down you get, the less opinionated that is. It's just sort of accidents of history and growth. But yeah, Nvidia, Google are at my top two, and that's not an accident.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
Before we move on from Google and start talking about the other announcements today, this huge news week this week. They have also announced a Google AI Ultra subscription plan, which is, just sort of this unlimited, all-you-can-eat, massive plan. We've also been talking about this in the last few episodes, right, Yanev? Where Google might suffer or struggle to monetize search, and it's not clear that they will, because a lot of these searches will be commercial in style and intent. They may make up for it or even blow by it with paid subscriptions. And so, the world, I think the internet is moving increasingly to paid models with a free tier. We've talked about this many times. And so this is just another signal that as much as you're willing to pay, Google and these other companies are willing to take your money and give you just massive utility and headroom in return. So that's worth noting as well.
Well, it's interesting. And, they're not the first mover here. So OpenAI have had ChatGPT Pro for a while now. I think it was a month ago or two that Anthropic released Claude Max. So these are the $100 plus a month subscriptions. And now Google is kind of matching those with the nearly all-you-can-eat type offerings. Now, I don't know if, this is sort of following market demand or if it's more signaling, but there are very few personal productivity type software that come anywhere close to $100 a month or $200 a month until these AI tools. So it's a very, very high price point. I don't know how many people outside of like the sort of insider industry people who just want to be on the cutting edge, finding it worthwhile. I would be really interested to know. But certainly where the big AI players are thinking is what we provide is so valuable that it will be worth hundreds of dollars a month to heavy users.
Yeah, I don't know that it's insiders necessarily as just professionals who need to get shit done, right? If you're a researcher, if you are a professional in a white collar job, doing real serious knowledge work, if you are a creative, if you are someone that cares about optimizing your life and has, any kind of upper middle class wealth, chances are you understand the value of this and are willing to pay. I agree with you though, over time, this is taxing the early adopters, and over time this will float downwards as the utility floats up, and float's probably the wrong word. I think it'll Moore's law its way into lower cost and higher utility really fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I remember when the iPhone first came out, the idea that anyone would pay $1,000, $1,500 for a mobile phone seemed insane, and now people don't even think about it. So, I think the point is, do you provide enough utility? And the big AI players are saying, yes, we do. And that's what it's worth paying for.
Well, just imagine, right? If this subscription is powering your TV, it's powering your home devices and security systems and cameras, it's powering your productivity suites, powering your your glasses, it's powering even your car with Android Auto. I mean, that's a small price to pay for the smartest operating system, multimodal, multi-device, multi-context. I mean, sign me up. That's just a no-brainer, I think. Let's move on to some other companies who've also announced other things today. Microsoft also had a big conference, Microsoft Build, and they announced a whole bunch of stuff. The three that were most interesting to me, were that, number one, Microsoft has support for agents inside Visual Studio and GitHub. So you can say to it, hey, here's a story or a task assigned to you, and the coding agent will pick it up and start working on it for you, like refactoring code or site reliability tasks. And it will literally pick up the task and kind of have an access log, a history of tasks, of execution, operations. It will create a pull request, and it'll be a coder with you, and it will start working with you and for you in GitHub and Visual Studio. The other thing that blew my mind was that Microsoft announced that MCP is being baked into Windows. So Windows is now a giant data provider and intent provider to generative AI models, which is crazy. And then finally, they announced Microsoft Discovery, where it's designed for researchers specifically in discovering new materials, new physics. And they showed off a video of a new substance they created, a new liquid they created, which you can dip a functioning piece of silicon in, a motherboard, to cool the motherboard while it operates. And like, this is literally a new coolant that they invented using their own software called Microsoft Discovery. Holy shit, right?
Holy shit. Yes. So these guys, they have their tentacles everywhere, right? Nuclear power, new coolant technology, material sciences, all sorts of stuff. But Chris, I actually wanted to segue here because, you talked about Microsoft having agents in Visual Studio, MCP in Windows. And so there are another couple of announcements from other companies around the latest in AI development that I think very much fit into that mold. And let's talk about what's happening, because this is, I would say, the fastest moving space of all the fast moving spaces is using AI to build software. So first of all, OpenAI have announced a new service called Codex. And it sounds a little bit similar to this agents in Visual Studio. It's basically a full cloud-based agentic environment that is very closely modeled on traditional software development workflows, right? So the idea is you can tell it what to do. Instead of running on your device, it's running in the cloud, and it basically creates a pull request into GitHub that you can then look at, right? So you have this sort of OpenAI-driven agent that is just producing code that you can then review and potentially incorporate into your product. Now, the other announcement is Windsurf, which was actually very recently acquired by OpenAI, but for the purposes of this announcement, we should still think of them as very separate because obviously all of this work happened prior to the acquisition. Is they announced a new frontier model optimized for coding. It's a bit weird with the acquisition, right? Because it nearly looked like they were going to be a new player in coding specific models called SWE1, SWE1, which stands for Software Engineer 1. Now, they claim it is up there with the frontier models. It's cheaper, it's faster, all of that stuff. It's great. I think the interesting thing about this announcement, and the one that ties it to the Microsoft announcement and to the OpenAI Codex announcement, is the way they've positioned it. To be clear, they've called it Software Engineer 1, SWE 1. They talk about it as a specialized model, but not for coding, but for software engineering. And in the press release, they made it very clear. They made the point that developing software is about so much more than just writing code, right? It is about this sort of full software development life cycle. How do you test this stuff? How do you understand requirements? How do you document it? How do you deploy it to production? And they're saying, well, we've optimized this model not for coding, but for software engineering. And so if we actually look at all three of these things, Chris, they're talking about process, right? They're saying, hey, we've got these amazing AI coding models, but now let's think about how it actually fits into modern software development processes, right? Agents straight in Visual Studio, Codex running in the cloud, connecting to GitHub, creating pull requests. This SWE1 model that specifically talks about the fact that it's about so much more than coding. So I think we've moved from the point of like, hey, who can just write the best code and meet some of these like elite coding benchmarks? Well, all of these models are already pretty good at that. So the next frontier is, how do we actually create products that really accelerate the development of real software? And these changes are just coming thick and fast.
This is where generative AI has to make contact with reality, right? And we've talked about when you start digging into a really technical domain expertise on ChatGPT, you start to bump up against its limitations. When you start to think about writing and deploying real production software with these, quote unquote coding models, you start to run up against real limitations. When you start to use Lovable or what are the, Bubble or Riplet, to try to build anything more complicated than a very lightweight front end with a simple, prototype, you start to run up against real limitations. And so creating systems of models inside complex workflows tuned for real deliverables, for real hardcore work. That's when you start talking about the productivity gains that we all started to dream about when the ChatGPT moment occurred. It turns out it's much, much, much harder to get these models to work in these contexts from end to end. They required larger context windows, better fine-tuning, better tooling, UI, UX, affordances, you name it. But now we're at this layer in the stack, at this point in the process, this era in the cycle where these things are starting to become real productivity gains, or just starting to deliver real productivity gains. So yeah, it's very exciting, and it's a rush, right? We've been saying this, every 3 to 6 months when these announcements occur, these build conferences and these IO conferences come around. It's like sort of there's a quiet period, and then there's an overwhelming rush of like, wow, where did all this come from? And it just sort of it's hard to keep up.
I agree, and I think seeing as you mentioned some of these vibe coding tools, I think it's just another good example to talk about the difference between AI software development tools and these vibe coding tools. And it's really interesting to witness what's happening. And the way I would frame it is nearly top down versus bottom up, right? Mm-hmm. So something like V0, Bolt.new, Base 44, these are top down. They're like, hey, give us a prompt and we'll build the software for you. And a lot of non-developers got very excited about this. And these are incredible tools for prototyping, but they're actually very bad tools for software development. Then on the other hand, you've started with things like GitHub Autopilot, that's been around for GitHub Copilot, that's been around for a few years, that's sort of smart autocomplete. And then you've moved through to tools like Cursor and Windsurf that are getting more agentic. And now we're thinking more about the software engineering workflow with things like Codex and Microsoft's announcements. So, but these are still tools for software developers to use. They're just able to take on more and more of the labor from them. But then on the other hand, actually, I saw, I wasn't going to include this, but Base 44, which is one of these more vibe coding type tools, just announced this morning that they are now doing version control so that you can actually revert to older versions. And so you can kind of see that maybe what's going to happen is you're going to have this bottom-up approach and the top-down approach, and they're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And, who knows who's going to succeed the most, where These fairly close to the metal tools for software developers are taking over more and more of the process, whereas these vibe coding tools are getting more and more disciplined about all of the things that software developers have been yelling about and saying, you can't just vibe code products into the world. You need to understand all of the different things around version control, around security, around testing, around scalability, stuff like that. So we're starting to see signs of some of those tools taking that more seriously.
It is actually very interesting to wonder and to try to game out which of these approaches is going to win. And maybe the answer is they both win. They're different tools for different people in different scenarios, different use cases. I do think in the fullness of time being 5, 10, 15, 50 years, who knows, that more software will be written by everyday people, generated on the fly, than will be written by software engineers. You could essentially say that many prompts will generate software on the fly without you even having to think about it. And if that software is generated within an architecture that already includes your policies, your privacy models, your production environments, so the IT department sets up the environment and the team is just spinning up software all day long for their bespoke needs. I think that's gonna happen quite naturally. Everyday people, both in the context of work and home. But in the meantime, these hardcore amazing tools are going to be incredibly important. And I think it's likely they will remain incredibly important for building industrial strength, enterprise grade, hardcore infrastructure software that runs the world. And I think they're going to both coexist ultimately. But it's fun to watch them evolve. It's absolutely a thrilling thing to see. We have 2 more topics we wanted to talk about just quickly. So Nvidia had some time in the spotlight recently as well, and Jensen announced a new thing called NVLink Fusion. He announced a lot of things, but NVLink Fusion was the thing that jumped out at me, which I thought was really interesting. Essentially what it is think of it as a way of making the Nvidia architecture decomposable and hot swappable in such a way that you don't necessarily have to buy Nvidia CPUs and GPUs and motherboards and servers and racks and power and it's all Nvidia and it's all a homogeneous ecosystem. What he's recognizing, I think, if I'm reading between the lines, is, hey, there's a lot of people creating TPUs and creating positron processors. We interviewed positron on the show. Everyone is competing to create parts of this system, and they're all claiming that they are NVIDIA killers or NVIDIA competitors. And what Jensen has said is basically, hey, no worries. We can get our arms around all of this, and all of it can coexist within the NVIDIA architecture, within the NVIDIA ecosystem. So if you've got a different CPU or a different GPU or a different TPU, no worries. We'll give you a little connector chip, a little SDK, a little whatever, little spec. You too can have your bespoke custom silicon, whatever, compatible with the NVIDIA, server architecture, AI factory architecture, as he likes to call it. And so this is called NVLink Fusion, and I think it's just another brilliant example of Jensen playing 4-dimensional chess and saying, you don't have to try to compete with us. We will embrace you and envelop you and put you within our ecosystem. And I thought that was just absolutely masterful. I don't know if you had a chance to see this, Yonev, or just upon hearing it.
I didn't. I don't have much to add, but yeah, except to say that Nvidia see themselves as so much more than a chip company. They have for a long time. I think it's a big difference between maybe their sort of layperson's public perception and their own understanding of their business, which is very much a sort of AI platform company at that sort of lower layer. Hardware, data centers, training software, all of that stuff.
They're a full stack AI tools and platform vendor, and they're even poking their head up into the application layer. They're incredible. And again, as I said, they're number 1 in my portfolio. The last thing we wanted to talk about just quickly was Airbnb essentially going from a travel app to being the everything app for services. Brian Chesky was on CNBC saying, hey, if Amazon claims to be the everything app, well, really they're the everything product app. They will get you any product in the world. we are the everything services app. We'll get you any service in the world, not just when you're traveling, but when you're at home as well. And so they've added experiences and they've added services. And essentially think of this as adding TaskRabbit and adding or relaunching and revamping their services product, but for people who live in the city as well, not just people traveling to a city. And they've increased the rate of curation and kind of certification to be part of that services pool. And so now Airbnb is really the everything app for your life and travel. And they've even added a layer of sort of social network over the top. So kind of a social, sort of a reputation layer for services and interactions in the real world. And so it's a little bit of Facebook for the real world and a little bit of TaskRabbit. And of course, a lot of Airbnb, classic. Really smart, because what that does is it takes them from being a sometimes app to being an everyday app, having a little bit of share of wallet to a much larger share of wallet, and taking their talents and their experience at bootstrapping and operating marketplaces into other marketplaces and verticals. So really, really, really smart, I think.
I'm not convinced. So you say it's smart. It could be smart, but this one's a bit close to my heart. I used to be chief operating officer at a company called Airtasker, which is, you could say it's the TaskRabbit for Australia. That's a company that's doing quite well. There's also TaskRabbit. There are a few others. But let me tell you, Airbnb are letting themselves in for a world of pain, right? There is a reason why, even after all this time, there is no Amazon for services. At Airtasker, we talked about wanting to be an Amazon for services. A TaskRabbit and so on. This is orders of magnitude harder than packaged consumer goods, right? And I think it is also at least an order of magnitude harder than vacation rentals or accommodation, right? Because you are dealing with so many variables, right? In terms of timing and service quality and pricing. What if a job takes longer than expected, right? You don't have that issue when you're renting out rooms. What if there was a disagreement over what exactly the job entailed? Different people do the same thing differently. People run late. There are so many things that happen. Also, there are so many different categories of service. Again, Airbnb, ultimately, sure, you can get a tiny house, you can get a beachfront house, you can get an apartment, but it's all accommodation. Once you move into services, you're introducing category upon category upon category. And I think they are risking both, an operational tsunami of difficulty, which I've witnessed firsthand, and also, Chris, a lot of brand dilution. To me, Airbnb is not the Amazon for services. Airbnb is Airbnb, right? And it is very much centered around accommodation, travel, and vacations. And so to say, well, I'm going to use Airbnb to get a gardener for my home, I'm going to use Airbnb to get a personal chef, it's a bit of a stretch, especially when their experience as product for travel has yet to really reach critical mass. So look, I wish them all the best. If I was a betting man, and maybe I am, if you're willing to take the other side of it, I'd say in 2 years, this thing is not going, if it's not dead, it's going to be on life support. It's not going to have any significant breakout usage the way the core Airbnb product has.
I don't know that I agree. Let's first find the agreement, and let's find the disagreement. So I agree with you that each of these categories introduces new operational risk, complexity, and renting out an apartment is not the same as hiring a chef. That's obviously true. But many of the things you described, the specific kinds of problems, are very similar. There is an awful. I use Airbnb a lot, right? I've been traveling a lot. We've booked a lot of places. There is all sorts of expectation mismatches, people running late to do key handoffs, people vomiting and trashing places. There's all sorts of policy violations, marketplace mismatch, supply and demand mismatch problems. It is, I would say, just as complex to rent out a place as it is to get a plumber to your door. There's so much to go wrong. In fact, renting out a place requires plumbers to come to the door, right? There's plumbing issues, there's cleaning issues, there's just so much to do. And so you might even argue that renting out a place is a superset of all services. I do think they have the muscle memory, the muscle to operationalize things. Airbnb knows the complexity of how much effort it takes to operationalize things, the same way Uber does. And so I don't think that they've if I had to bet, I would say they have not underestimated that complexity. They know the complexity of the customer support, of the policy management, of the, the insurance, and on and on and on. And yes, they're going to have to adapt to each category, and they are launching category by category, not all the categories at once. And I think they've considered those things. Now, whether the brand can stretch, whether people will, revert their muscle memory to Airbnb instead of Airtasker or TaskRabbit, yet to be seen. But I think it's a risk worth taking if you can massively expand your TAM, your share of wallet, your set of use cases. It's essentially the thing we talked about forever at Uber, which is the Uber for everything, right? They are trying to launch Uber for everything powered by the Airbnb app. And I think Uber should have done this. I think Uber should have done this a long time ago. In fact, I know Uber was dreaming about doing this a long time ago. I worked on part of it. And just Uber has been taken over by a travel guy and a bean counter. And they're just being really, really incremental. And if Travis was still there, I think they would have done this months, if not years ago. It's a big bet, but I think it's one worth taking.
Yeah, look, we'll see. I think, yes, why did Uber not succeed? You've got your beliefs around the leadership change, and you could well be right. But, it's another good example of Uber has been around for a long time and has not created Uber for everything. Nobody.
Yeah, because Uber doesn't have the founder in place, right? You can't founder mode a company when the founder has been ejected out the back, right? And so you need the founder to be able to do what Airbnb is doing. And he literally, he invented the term founder mode for a reason. No, there's no way Dara and his squad of hired goons is going to go pivot Uber to be the services app for everything. It's just, there's not going to happen.
Tell us what you really think, Chris.
You have to build, business cases and whatever. Not going to happen.
Okay, well, look, we will see. I would love for this thing to succeed. But I think, yes, getting it right in one vertical. I think we're saying the same thing, but we're coming to different conclusions, Chris, which is that getting it right for one vertical is really, really hard. Getting it right for accommodation is really, really hard. I didn't mean to be dismissive of that. Each new vertical you add is a whole new world of pain. And so, going from 1 to N is a vast quantity of work, right? Uber went from 1 to 2, right? It's got Uber Eats. And yes, yes, you've told us what you think about Dara and his crew, but I would just say that sort of horizontal services marketplaces where you're in lots and lots of different types of service, they've never worked. It's not just Uber. It's everyone who's tried has, at best had a very modest success. TaskRabbit was one of the original Silicon Valley tech darlings. They're still around, but, they're smaller than, about 1,000 6-month-old AI startups, right? They've never reached that level of traction, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So, look, we'll wait and see. It could be fascinating. Maybe I'll use it, and we see how it works out.
Yeah, I have to be clear, just to clean up the record a little bit. I think I don't know anything about Dara, and he seems like a really, really nice guy.
Some of my best friends are Dara.
No, genuinely, I think Dara seems like a really nice guy, a really sweet guy, a very thoughtful guy, a real statesman. I think he has navigated Uber through a hell of a shitstorm and restored some of the brand promise or the brand trust and been a steady hand at the tiller. And I think that was absolutely needed after the board and investors absolutely, destroyed Travis and any of his credibility and the whole cycle there. So I don't mean to be, it's nothing personal against Dara. It's Dara stepped into a very difficult situation. What I'm saying is, you can't discount the value of founder mode by the founder. And Dara has no choice but to operate like the hired CEO mode. And he had no choice but to hire in a stable, gray-haired, a stable, mature leadership team to operate that business out of a real chaotic time. So, yeah, I really don't want to be seen as hating on Dara. He seems like a really, really great guy.
Maybe that's a good place to wrap up, Chris. We love Dara. Some of our best friends are Dara. Nothing against Dara. It ain't personal. But folks, I'm actually really excited. We got through a whole episode without talking about politics. We just dive deep into all the tech and incredible product releases that are going to affect all of us as founders. So really great chat, Chris.
We forgot about one last topic about Trump. No, just kidding.
Chris, if people want to hear more from you, where can they go?
Yeah, you can hear more from me over on social media at Chris Sart on all the interwebs. and at chrissard.com and chrissard.com/newsletter. How about you, Yanev?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a bit less of a boring place, also trying to tone down the politics a bit. That comes in waves. But yes, I love getting requests from TSP listeners, so hit me up, let me know you're a listener, and I will accept your request. All right, thanks, Chris. That was fun as always.
All right, awesome, man. Talk to you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.